O Lord of hosts, be with us, for we have none other help in times of adversity but Thee. O Lord of hosts, have mercy on us.
Welcome back, everyone. This is David Patrick Carey with Church of the Eternal Logos, and today I want to speak to you guys about a very interesting Hermetic text titled The Discourse on the 8th and Ninth. Now, I imagine many of you are already generally familiar with Hermeticism. Some of you may have already specifically read the Asclepius or Poimandres or even the entire Corpus Hermeticum. But I venture to say that the vast majority of you have never even heard of the Discourse on the 8th and Ninth, let alone have read it. And that is what we're going to be doing in today's video. Now, the only place to find the Discourse on the 8th and Ninth is the Nag Hammadi library. And so we're going to be looking at a Hermetic text. Often we are looking at Gnostic texts in the Nag Hammadi library. We're going to be looking at a religiously Hermetic text, an existential text, a liturgical text, a ritualistic initiation, a mystical visionary experience, all of which is going to be contained in this text, the Discourse on the 8th and Ninth. So, this is what we're going to be getting into, and as always, even though we dive into Gnostic text, Hermetic text, we're not Hermetic, we're not Gnostic. These are incoherent worldviews, are contradictory. This one is going to take a lot of Neoplatonic elements, and this is why I thought it'd be a great video to make, because we're going to see the sort of schematics of what I've talked about with a dot having concentric circles around it as the sort of schematic, the architecture of Neoplatonic theology, is that we're going to see this text take that same schematic. Maybe you could invert it in the sense that the dot in the middle would be the disciple, the initiate, and then outside the last circle would be God. You'd have to have 10 spheres here. But we're going to see the divine mind, or the logos, if you will, take on a demiurgic quality. We're going to see God be the sort of simple essence, the one that you'd see in Neoplatonism. And we're going to see emanationism, obviously, with the variation of the spheres. So there's going to be a lot of different things to take away. Also, this immense emphasis on knowledge and mind. This is going to be related, again, to Hermeticism, and this real emphasis on the divine aspect, really, of humanity is really your mind. And it's this mental capacity. So this whole text is about having some divine mystical revelation so that your mind can be one with the mind of God, the divine mind. And so with that being said, let's just dive into it. So the Discourse on the 8th and Ninth is a 2nd century text. So this is actually earlier than some of the other Gnostic texts that we've read. Now, it occurs in Egypt, like it actually takes place in Egypt, but we also believe it was written in Egypt. And for those of you who aren't already aware, this would be a good point to highlight the connection between Hermes and Thoth. So the whole Hermeticism, Hermetic traditions, Hermes Trismegistus is all related to a sort of wisdom deity, this wisdom magician, a sort of magical entity, a god, if you will, who's related to the alphabet, language, poetry, words, ritual, magic. And that goes back to what people believe to be the emerald tablets with Thoth. And so Hermes is a sort of Greek version of that, and this is why you'd find Hermopolis in Egypt. And in fact, this is actually going to play into this text, because at the end, the city that it refers to, I think it's like Diospolis or something. We'll figure it out. But for my research, it's actually talking about how this would be Hermopolis. And so it would have been the city in which Hermes would have been venerated and worshipped as God. So a lot of interesting stuff there. As I mentioned, this is a very religious text. Some of the Hermetic texts you get into are very philosophical. It's more philosophical than religious. This one's pretty explicitly religious, and therefore was even used in a ritualistic context. It was a liturgical text that was actually performed. And then the whole point of the Discourse on the 8th and Ninth is existentialist impulse to get beyond the spheres. So what is the 8th? What is the 9th? These are actually spheres. So within the Hermetic cosmology, there are these various concentric spheres, and the sort of degradation of moving down through these spheres is what then puts, what gives you your sort of human nature. And if you regenerate and move back through these spheres, you can become one with human, or with divine nature rather. And so we see the eighth sphere being the sphere of souls, the ninth sphere being the sphere of the divine mind, and then the 10th sphere being the sphere in which the unbegotten God actually exists. So this text is a dialogue between Hermes, who's often referred to as father, right, and his disciple, who is referred to as son or my child. His disciple is advanced, so this is not a novice. This is why this text is sort of a ritualistic initiation. The son here, the person that's in dialogue with Hermes, is well advanced in the sort of mystery of Hermeticism, the mystery of the universe, the mystery of man's mental capacity, right? And so this text is about him passing through and up to the last stage of spiritual perfection. So up to the ninth sphere, the sphere of the divine mind, and of course the 10th sphere is the sphere of the unbegotten God. And this, like I said, is an initiatory rite of regeneration. So it's regenerating. It's claiming the sort of lost aspects of humanity from the declension through these various spheres. The idea is that when you're initiated, according to this text, into the 8th and ninth sphere, you are reborn. And that's why this text reiterates this actually multiple times, of being reborn, and therefore being able to sort of have this illuminative vision, be born again, and then illuminated by God's divine mind. Okay? So we can see how this would potentially cross over to Christian audiences, to Gnostic elements. You could see how a Gnostic could read this text and see the sort of divine mind, what they might perceive as the Logos, all these things, and be very enamored with this worldview. Of course, we're not going to have any Demiurge or Yaldabaoth or Beelzebub or anything like that, but in regards to other Hermetic texts, this is going to be most similar. Even though it's unique, like I said, scholars didn't even know this thing existed, but if you're going to compare it to other known Hermetic philosophical or religious texts, it's going to be closest to what's called the secret dialogue of Hermes Trismegistus on the mountain, on being born again, and on the promise to be silent. So there are lots of overlaps with this text with that one, though there are unique differences with this text. And as I mentioned, this conversation takes place in Egypt, but it was actually created in Egypt. It was actually written in Egypt as, again, the 2nd century. So this is a 2nd century text. And getting to the 8th sphere means going beyond the influential confines of the 7 planets. So again, we can see a sort of much more ancient cosmology and the idea of the astrological import of the various planets. And Hermes is even going to take a very astrological approach when he's talking to his son, his child, his disciple, about finding him in the sky when he's at this point or that point. So very interesting stuff. And so because it's about the confines of the 7 planets, then you can understand why the 8th sphere, 9th sphere are going to be important, because it's progressing beyond the first 7 planetary spheres, and which represents the kind of idea of harmonia, right? The cosmic framework moved by fate, or the demiurgic spirit, something like that. And unlike other Hermetic writings in the Nag Hammadi library, this work, as I said, was unknown to scholars. And Hermes, in this, he's going to be identified, he takes a sort of ambiguous position as he's not the God, the unbegotten God, but he's a divine being. He's referred to as Lord in sort of deific terms, which sometimes it almost feels like he is God. But he's the divine being who's revealing God to the disciple. He's referred to as Father. He's the teacher. And so, with that being said, I just have two paragraphs here I wanted to read in regards to talking about this text before I really dive into it. And so, in regards to Poimandres, which I mentioned earlier is another text within the Corpus Hermeticum, Poimandres is a sort of Hermetic interpretation of Genesis, of the creation narrative in Genesis. And so there's two paragraphs here where it's kind of contextualizing the conversation we're about to read in regards to the worldview, the cosmology, the Hermetic understanding of creation. And so it reads, as to the origin of humankind, according to Poimandres, first the mind gives birth, after its image, to an androgynous human within the superior world. Being mirrored by the watery nature of the inferior world, this first human produces a form after his own likeness. Thus is the begotten second androgynous human, who is twofold, mortal in his body and immortal in his essential being. The latter, in turn, begets 7 androgynous human beings made out of material nature. Then the two sexes are separated. Time starts its course along with the revolutions of the heavenly spheres, and human generations like ours are brought into being. So before I read the next paragraph, again, notice this emphasis on androgyny. And this is going to be key for us as Christians to see the kind of Neoplatonic emphasis on the one. You see, they philosophically speaking, have a problem with dialectics. Those of you who watch Jay Dyer, you're already up to speed on all this stuff. But you see then how the collapsing of dialectics into a unitary, as opposed to the orthodox understanding of making it trifold, making it a tripartite understanding, still leaves you in a sort of dialectical tension. And so we see here trying to collapse, trying to deal with the dialect of male and female. Well, we have androgynous beings. And often we see this throughout the Gnostic and the Hermetic scripture. So just be conscientious of that, how we see the sort of attempt to collapse dialectics back into a one, which is the problem. You need to move as how orthodoxy gets outside the dialectical tension, is we kind of resort to a tripartite, trifold operation. So continuing, it says, Poimandres teaches that salvation consists in recognizing oneself as immortal. And so this is important in regards to Hermeticism, is that in the Asclepius, in the Corpus Hermeticum, Hermes is always talking about how you want to elevate yourself to God. You want to think as if you are God. You want to think as if you're old, as if you're young, as if you're dead, as if you're just born, and kind of expanding the ability to conceptualize, to perceive reality, things that you haven't even experienced, is what going to allow you to sort of elevate in a sort of divinized, illuminative state. And so envisioning, expanding one's perspective, expanding one's conceptual abilities is really, really important. And so when this says, Poimandres teaches that salvation consists in recognizing oneself as immortal and knowing that love is the cause of death, and in becoming acquainted with all that exists. So this is sort of a visionary process, meditative, contemplative process, if you will. And those of you who've read Corpus Hermeticum, you're going to be totally on board and be like, oh, yeah, I know what you're talking about. This goal can be reached by living piously. Then at the moment of death, when the soul is freed from the material body, the human being rushes up through the cosmic framework and enters the 8th sphere. Then he hears certain powers that exist above the 8th sphere and sing hymns to God with sweet voices. God himself dwells on a higher level. All those who have received knowledge are bound to enter into him. And so it continues and goes on, but that frames what we're talking about here, right? That the illuminated, the person with a sort of gnosis, right? We can take a sort of Gnostic approach here. The person with gnosis, the person who is illuminated, the person who is initiated into the Hermetic mysteries, upon death, their soul, their mind can rise into the 8th sphere, the sphere of the souls, the sphere of the angels, and then sing hymns to God to potentially enter into the 9th sphere, the sphere where the divine mind exists. So even here it says, then Then comes the framework moved by fate, or the demiurgic spirit. Then comes the begotten one, the rational soul of the cosmos, on the same level as the eighth. Eighth is always going to be associated with the soul, the abode of individual souls and angels. One step higher, we meet the self-begotten one, divine mind and its powers, on the same level as the ninth. So ninth, we have the divine mind. We have a sort of demiurgic logos. Over the heights of heavens reigns the unbegotten God. Okay? So this, I think, is really beneficial. And now we can sort of have a schematics where maybe the dot, if we have concentric circles, the dot is the individual here in physical reality, and then the concentric circles, we would have 10 of those, and the outside the 10th one would be actually the unbegotten God. Now we're going to be diving into and actually reading the Discourse on the 8th and 9th. Here we go. The Discourse on the 8th and 9th. Introduction to the ceremony. Like I said, this is a liturgical text. My Father, yesterday you promised me you would take my mind to the 8th stage, and after that you would take me to the 9th. You said this is the sequence of the tradition. Yes, my child, this is the sequence, but the promise was made about human nature. I told you this when I initiated the promise, and I set it on the condition that you will remember each of the stages. After I received the Spirit through the power, I established the action for you. Clearly understanding resides in you. In me, it is as if the power were pregnant, for when I conceived from the spring that flows to me, I gave birth. Father, you have spoken every word rightly to me, but I am amazed at what you say. You said, the power in me. He said, I gave birth to the power as children are born. Then, Father, I have many siblings, if I am to be counted among the generations. Right, my child. This good thing is counted, always. So, my child, you must know your siblings and honor them rightly and well, since they have come from the same Father. I have addressed each of the generations. I have named them, since they are offspring like these children. Then, Father, do they also have mothers? And you always see this in the Gnostic, Hermetic elements where God then has to have a sort of female figure, usually Sophia in the Gnostic text. My child, they are spiritual, for they exist as forces nurturing other souls. That is why I say they are immortal. Your word is true, and from now on it cannot be refuted. Father, begin the discourse on the 8th and 9th, and count me also with my siblings. Let us pray, my child, to the Father of all, with your siblings, who are my children, that he may grant the Spirit, and I may speak. How do they pray, Father, when they are united with the generations? Father, I want to obey. There's a missing part of the text, and then it says, this is not from necessity or law. Rather one rests in her, and she loves him. Loving makes you remember the progress you have experienced as wisdom from the books. My child, think of your early years of life. Like a little child, you have raised senseless and foolish questions. Father, I have experienced progress and foreknowledge from the books, and they are greater than what is lacking. These matters are my first concern. My child, when you understand the truth of your statement, you will find your siblings, who are my children, praying with you. Father, I understand nothing else than the beauty I've experienced in the books. This is what you call the beauty of the soul, the edification you have experienced in stages. May understanding come to you, and you will become wise. Father, I have understood each of the books, and especially, part missing from the text, that is in part missing from the text. My child, and praises from those who raise them. Father, I shall receive from you the power of the discourse you will utter. As it was spoken to the two of us, Father, let us pray. My child, it is fitting for us to pray to God with all our mind and all our heart and all our soul, and to ask him that the gift of the 8th reach us, and that each receive from him what belongs to him. Your job is to understand. Mine is to be able to utter the discourse from the spring that flows from me. And now we're moving to another section. This section is titled Prayer for the Ascent to the 8th and 9th. Prayer to the Ascent from the 8th and 9th. And this is just one long prayer. And it reads, Let us pray, Father. I call upon you, who rules over the kingdom of power, whose word is an offspring of light, whose words are immortal, eternal, immutable, whose will produces life for forms everywhere, whose nature gives form to substance, by whom souls, powers, and angels are moved, whose word reaches all who exist, whose forethought reaches everyone in that place, who produces everyone, who has divided the eternal realm among spirits, who has created everything, who, being self within self, supports everything, being perfect, the invisible God to whom one speaks in silence, whose image is moved when it is managed, and it is so managed, mighty one in power, who is exalted above majesty, who is superior to those honored. Lord, grant us wisdom from your power that reaches us, and that we may relate to ourselves the vision of the 8th and 9th. Already we have advanced to the 7th. Since we are faithful and abide in your law, your will we fulfill always. We have walked in your way and have renounced evil, so the vision may come. Lord, grant us truth in the image. Grant that through spirit we may see the form of the image that lacks nothing, and accept the reflection of the fullness. From us, through our praise, recognize the Spirit within us. From you, the universe receives soul. From you, one unbegotten, the begotten one came to be. The birth of the self-begotten is through you, the birth of all begotten things that exist. Accept these spiritual offerings from us, which redirect to you, with all our heart, soul, and strength. Save what is within us, and grant us immortal wisdom. And that is the prayer. Now we're moving to the next section. And so notice the insistence, as I said, upon knowledge, upon gnosis, upon insight, upon vision. Okay. Vision of the 8th and 9th. My child, let us remember and love. Be happy about this. Already from this, the power that is light is coming to us. I see it in ineffable depths. How shall I tell you, my child? We now have begun to see the places. How shall I tell you about the all? I am mind, and I see another mind, one that moves the soul. I see the one that moves me from pure forgetfulness. You give me power. I see myself. I wish to speak. Fear seizes me. I have found the beginning of the power above all powers without beginning. I see a spring bubbling with life. I have said, my child, that I am mind. I have seen. Language cannot reveal this. For all of the 8th, my child, and the souls in it, and the angels, sing a hymn in silence. I mind, understand. And that's right. I mind, understand. How does one sing a hymn through silence? Can no one communicate with you? I am silent, Father. I want to sing a hymn to you while I am silent. Then sing it. I am mind. I understand mind, Hermes, which cannot be explained because it says in itself. I am happy, Father, to see you smiling. The universe is happy. No creature will lack your life, for you are Lord of the inhabitants everywhere. Your forethought keeps watch. I call you, Father, aeons of aeons, Spirit, divine being, who through Spirit sends moisture on everyone. What do you tell me, Father Hermes? My child, I say nothing about this. It is right before God for us to remain silent about what is hidden. Trismegistus, do not let my soul be deprived of the vision, O divine being. Everything is possible for you as master of the universe. Sing praise again, my child, and sing while you are silent. Ask what you want in silence. When he finished praising, he called out, Father Trismegistus, what shall I say? We have received this light, and I myself see this same vision in you. I see the eighth, and the souls in it, and the angels singing a hymn to the ninth, and its powers. I see the one with the power of them all, creating those in the Spirit. From now on, it is good for us to remain silent and head bowed. From now on, do not speak about the vision. It is fitting to sing a hymn to the Father until the day we leave the body. What you sing, Father, I also want to sing. I am singing a hymn to myself. While you rest, sing praise. You have found what you seek. But it is right, Father, for me to sing praise when my heart is filled. What is right is for you to sing praise to God, so it may be written in the imperishable book. I shall offer up the praise in my heart as I invoke the end of the universe, and the beginning of the beginning, the goal of the human quest, the immortal discovery, the producer of light and truth, the sower of reason, the love of immortal life. No hidden word can speak of you, Lord. My mind wants to sing a hymn to you every day. I am the instrument of your spirit. Mind is your plectrum, and your guidance makes music with me. I see myself. I have received power from you, for your love has reached us. Right, my child. Oh, grace, after this, I thank you by singing a hymn to you. You gave me life when you made me wise. I praise you. I invoke your hidden name. You exist with spirit. I sing to you with godliness. And now this is the last section of this text. Instructions for the preservation of the text. My child, copy this book for the temple of Diospolis, which the notes were saying is actually referring to Hermopolis, in hieroglyphic characters, and call it the eighth reveals the ninth. I shall do it, Father, as you command. My child, copy the contents of the book on turquoise steles, which is related to the common turquoise fragments of Alexandrian steles. My child, it is fitting to copy this book on turquoise steles and hieroglyphic characters, for mind itself has become the supervisor of these things. So I command that this discourse be carved in stone and that you put it in my sanctuary. 8 guards watch over it with 8 guards watch over it with 9 of the sun. That's important because the 8th and 9th sphere, from my understanding, the 8th is Hermopolis, the 9th is Heliopolis. So the 9th sphere is going to be related to the sun, symbolically, light, all this stuff. So we see the 9th with the sun. The males on the right have faces of frogs. The females on the left have faces of cats. Put a square milkstone at the base of the turquoise tablets and copy the name of the azure stone tablet in hieroglyphic characters. My child, you must do this when I am in Virgo. You see the astrological reference. And the sun is in the first half of the day, and 15 degrees have passed by me. Father, all you say I shall do gladly. Copy an oath in the book, so that those who read the book may not use the wording for evil purposes or try to subvert fate. Rather, they should submit to the law of God and not transgress at all, but in purity ask God for wisdom and knowledge. And whoever is not begotten beforehand by God develops through the general and instructional discourses. Such a person will not be able to read what is written in this book, even though the person's conscience is pure within, and the person does nothing shameful and does not go along with it. Such a person progresses by stages and advances in the way of immortality, and so advances in the understanding of the 8th that reveals the 9th. I shall do it, Father. This is the oath. I adjure you who will read this holy book by heaven and earth and fire and water and 7 rulers of substance and the creative spirit in them and the unbegotten God and the self-begotten and the begotten, that you guard what Hermes has communicated. God will be at one with those who keep the oath, and everyone we have named, but the wrath of each of them will come upon those who violate the oath. This is the perfect one who is my child. And that concludes the discourse on the 8th and 9th. So, again, we see this incredible emphasis on knowledge, on mind, on understanding, and somehow gnosis is going to be related to your elevation through the spheres, to even your immortality, which is specifically related to the attaining of particular knowledge, specific knowledge about the unnamed or hidden name of God. And so I think this is very interesting. We see a sort of emanationist understanding of the world, where we have the various spheres. We see, again, the Gnostic, Hermetic emphasis on mind. We see Hermes being a divine being, being a ruler of the universe. He takes a very interesting sort of position where it's hard to tell exactly what he is. He's not God. He's not unbegotten. But somehow he claims to be ruler of the universe at certain points. But I think it's a pretty interesting text that most people have never even heard of. And there's a prayer called the Prayer of Thanksgiving that I was thinking about making another video on, where it is the epilogue to what we just read. So what I want to do is then make another video on the prayer of thanksgiving, which would be read. It would be a prayer that would be read after the discourses on the 8th and 9th. They're actually tied together. So that's what I'm going to do in the next video, is do a reading of the prayer of thanksgiving. And with that being said, that concludes the discourse on the 8th and 9th, the 8th and 9th spheres, the realms approaching God and man's regeneration in the Hermetic cosmology. Of course, we reject all this stuff, and one of the big contentions for us as Christians, for us as Orthodox, is going to be, the sort of impersonal nature of the God and the sort of personal nature we see of Hermes. So the personhood of God, the triunity of God, the sort of strange begotten demiurgic qualities of the 9th sphere, the divine mind, these are where we see obvious Neoplatonic elements. So as Christians, we could just counter this text with the same arguments we would make against Neoplatonism, which would then come back to us arguing about the personhood of our God and how we actually know God through revelation and stuff like this, and then make more logically coherent arguments from there. So that concludes this video. Let me know what you guys think. Have you heard of the discourse on the 8th and 9th before? Have you guys read the other Hermetic texts, the Asclepius, Poimandres, the entire Corpus Hermeticum? In fact, in the future, I'd love to do a video on the Emerald Tablets, just some of these kind of very popular, New Agey, spiritual but not religious, usually magical Hermetic texts people are interested in. We should do videos on those in the future. So anyways, leave comments and let me know what you guys think, and I will try to respond to everybody as usual. And until next time, which I'm going to be doing the prayer of thanksgiving, which is the epilogue prayer that actually ends this discourse on the 8th and 9th. You know what? In fact, I'll just do it in another video. All right. Well, let me know what you guys think. I will see you guys in the next video. As always, God bless.